Chapter 2. A Beautiful Life. Life sometimes has a grotesque way of reminding us how fragile we are as human beings. If someone had told me that my son Brian would die at age 18 in an auto accident just 4 months before his high school graduation, I would have told them there's no way this could happen. But it did happen. We had a wonderful life once. Me, a neurosurgeon, my wife, a forensic pathologist, and four smart, talented, beautiful children. The perfect family, really. Brian was the oldest of four, two boys and two girls, all with different interests and personalities. Kevin, our 15-year-old, is outgoing, confident, and somewhat mischievous. Julie, our 14-year-old, is quiet and reserved. Christy, our 11-year-old, is empathetic and sometimes overly sensitive. Then there was Brian, who was mature beyond his years. There are so many things I would like to tell you about my son Brian so you could really get to know the amazing person he was. But how do you describe 18 years of life in such a short passage? Obviously, you can't, but I will try to give you a synopsis of his character, personality, and the beautiful life he led. There was a previous incident when I experienced terror and panic at the thought of losing Brian. We lived in Rochester, New York, where Cindy and I were both in residency. It was a beautiful fall Saturday, and I decided to go canoeing on the Erie Canal. I took along Brian, who was 2 years old, and a close friend, Paul, who was chief resident in urology. The air was chilly, but the sun was shining. We wore long pants and heavy jackets, and I bundled up Brian so he could stay warm. Before we left the dock, the rental person told us how safe the canoes were and how we couldn't tip them over if we tried. Paul didn't wear a life jacket, and I debated if Brian and I needed them, since we already had all our heavy clothes on. In addition, Paul and I were right there if anything happened. So we left the dock. We canoed for several hours, paddling lazily along the Erie Canal. The turning leaves blazed in colors of burnt orange, yellow, and deep red. Only an occasional train horn or chirping of birds disrupted the stillness in the air. We were having a nice, relaxing afternoon, just the three of us. At some point, near the end of our trip, Brian spotted something in the water. As we leaned over to look, the canoe listed and, as if in slow motion, started to fill with water. The next thing I knew, Paul and I were in the water, away from the canoe, and Brian was nowhere in sight. Since he was only 2 years old and couldn't swim, I immediately panicked. That sickening sensation filled the pit of my stomach with the thought that my child could be dead or dying, and there was nothing I could do about it. The water was cold and murky, and Brian had vanished. I envisioned him struggling helplessly to reach the surface of the water, but instead sinking to the bottom of the canal in his heavy clothes, dying a horrible death. We frantically dove under the water to try and find him. I could see nothing and felt blindly underwater in hopes of touching his body. God, what have I done? I thought. What seemed like an eternity in actuality was a mere 30 or 40 seconds. Then it dawned on me to look under the canoe, which was overturned. We lifted it, and there was Brian, quietly shivering in the water under the canoe with his life jacket on. You see, I did have Brian wear a life jacket that day, and it was the life jacket that saved his life. And to think that I had considered not putting it on him. Without it, Brian would have surely died at age 2 in the Erie Canal. But something had changed my mind at the last second, and I decided to put the life jacket on him. It felt as if Brian had escaped death that day, and for the rest of his life, I worried that something bad might happen to him. And it did. He lived 16 more years, then died tragically in a car accident. I often wonder what made me change my mind that day about the life jacket. Was he meant to live for a purpose that he would fulfill in the next 16 years, only to be taken when he had fulfilled that purpose? I guess I'll never know the answer to that question, but it sure does make me wonder. From that point on, Brian lived a wonderful life. He was very active as a child and learned to play tennis, golf, football, baseball, basketball, table tennis, and chess. He learned to bowl, run track, ice skate, snow ski, water ski, snowboard, wakeboard, scuba dive, and play spike ball. He loved sports and was active in all of them. He also loved watching them on TV. He and Kevin spent endless hours watching ESPN together, and he and I spent hours watching golf together. We loved to watch golf tournaments, particularly the Masters each year. Golf was our way of bonding with each other. The summer before he died, he had the opportunity to play in the Optimist International Golf Tournament at the PGA National Golf Course in Palm Beach, Florida, a professional course designed by Jack Nicklaus, where the touring pros play the Honda Classic each year. Afterward, Brian was so looking forward to watching the pros play on the same holes that he had played on. Unfortunately, he never made it to spring to watch the tournament. I watched it for him on TV and cried as I remembered following him around each of those same holes for several days during the last summer of his life. Then there were the trips and family vacations. Brian was lucky enough to travel many times to some pretty fun places. He'd been to Disney World and on a Disney cruise as a child to meet Mickey Mouse. He had scuba dived multiple times in the blue waters of the Caribbean to see exotic fish and sea turtles, which he often chased after. At Niagara Falls, he rode the Maid of the Mist to the base of the falls and walked behind the falls themselves. At Vail, Snowbird, and Keystone ski resorts, he skied and snowboarded down mountains, went high-speed tubing, and rode in an authentic horse-drawn sleigh through the open snowfields of Colorado. In New York City, he saw the lights at Christmas, visited the Statue of Liberty, and went to the top of the Empire State Building. In Denver, he hiked up a mountain and watched a Nuggets NBA game. In Costa Rica, he saw an active volcano, went whitewater rafting, hiked in the rainforest, and ziplined through the canopy. In Jamaica, he rode horseback on the beach, rafted down a canopied river in the mountains, and swam with dolphins. In Mexico, he explored underground cenotes and an enormous natural outdoor water park called Xcaret. He road tripped to Florida with his family, fought in the car with his siblings, and searched for shells on the beach. He stayed up all night with his family at Cape Canaveral to watch the space shuttle lift off at dawn and met a real-life astronaut. He took boat rides on Lake Erie to the islands and visited Cedar Point Amusement Park each summer. At our cottage, he water skied, wakeboarded, and spent time with his family and cousins. At home, he played basketball in the driveway, hung out with friends in our basement, and ice skated and played hockey on our homemade ice rink. He watched movies with us at home and went out to dinner with us as a family. And he joined us on our last family vacation, a Caribbean cruise, just 1 month before he died. It was just the 6 of us, our last time together as a family. What a wonderful life he lived in just 18 short years. A life filled with so much love and precious memories to last most people a lifetime. Another big part of Brian's life was his love for animals, particularly his dogs. From the time he was a baby to the day he died, he always had the companionship of a dog. Our first dog was Coco, a chocolate lab, which we got the year before Brian was born. We spent many hours taking her for walks or swimming at our local parks in Rochester, New York. On the weekends, we often went to a place called Townock Falls, which was a river tributary feeding into a finger lake, where we walked Coco up the riverbed to the falls and let her swim in the natural pool at the base of the falls. The excitement and fear in Brian's eyes when Coco swam near the falls was precious. He would yell and yell for her to swim back, terrified that she would disappear under the falls. Coco moved back to Toledo with us and lived a long, happy life. We eventually got a black lab as well, which we named Nautica. Oh, the fun Brian had playing ball with those 2 dogs. Coco died at age 13 when Brian was 12. He was heartbroken, as were our other children. Coco had been there his whole life, and now she was gone. This was Brian's first real encounter with death. We've had several other dogs through the years and currently have Nautica and Ellie, a Springer Spaniel. Whenever Brian came home from school or after a workout, he greeted his dogs with loving enthusiasm, a trait that he will always be remembered for. Then there was golf. The kid could golf, and what a passion he had for it. In just 4 short years, he became an accomplished golfer, achieving a 4 handicap. He played in numerous tournaments, both in state and out of state. I remember the first time Brian ever swung a golf club. I took him and Kevin for a golf lesson at the Silviana Country Club, where we were members. Brian was in 8th grade. I sat on the top of the hill at the far end of the driving range and watched how well both Brian and Kevin made contact with the ball for their first time ever swinging a club. After that first lesson, Brian's passion for golf quickly grew. He began to study the game and play on a regular basis. One summer at SCC, he played the second most rounds of any member, second only to a retired physician. As Brian continued to play, I watched him grow and mature as a person, learning life lessons about himself, about his capabilities, limitations, and most importantly, failures. Everyone wants to win, but Brian learned that winning wasn't always possible. He also quickly learned that he could only have a chance at winning if he became better at the game. And he could only get better at the game if he practiced. And so he did. It was no different than academics. If he didn't put in the time and effort, he wouldn't make the grade. But something I noticed developing in Brian was his ability to accept his limitations and failures and learn from them. When he shot a bad score, he didn't give up. Instead, he practiced that much harder to achieve a better score the next time. He was learning about balance in life. If he didn't play well on any given day, he knew that he had given it his all and moved on. He didn't dwell on his failures. In time, he gained an understanding that life is not just about winning or being the best. It is about setting goals and being content that you gave it your all no matter what the outcome. If only we could all learn to accept our failures. That is the true measure of a person. It's easy to acknowledge one's accomplishments, but the true test is to acknowledge one's shortcomings. That means accepting yourself for who you are and not what you think others want you to be. Brian seemed to understand that life was about appreciating what he had and using his fortunate situation to encourage and help others, to be humble and help pass his talents and knowledge on to others. In golf, Brian often tried to help other players in little ways, like checking yardages for them with his rangefinder during tournaments or raking sand traps to keep the pace of play moving. On the golf team, he frequently shared his talents with his junior teammates and took the time to help them improve their game. He was competitive, yet comfortable with himself to the point that he didn't have to worry about losing an advantage to other players by helping them. He demonstrated a similar demeanor in the realm of academics. A brief story follows to illustrate this point. A student in Brian's class at St. John's Jesuit High School recently told me that Brian had prepared an extensive set of notes for an open book exam they were taking in history class. On the morning of the exam, Brian copied all of his notes and shared the notes with the whole class. Of course, this was done without the teacher's knowledge. The entire class scored well on the test. He always strived to achieve high grades, but for his own satisfaction. He didn't worry if someone was going to outdo him. He was more concerned with whether he could outdo himself. Brian was gaining an understanding that life was not all about what he wanted as an individual, but much more about helping others get what they wanted. Life was also about satisfaction and confidence in oneself. As his golf game improved, he became more confident in himself, and with confidence came maturity as well as better scores. His best round was a 68 at Heather Downs Country Club, but the round he was most proud of was the 69 he shot at the historic Inverness Country Club, which has hosted 4 U.S. Opens, 2 PGA Championships, and 2 Senior PGA Championships. He shot this score, which is 2 under par, at age 17 from the gold tees, which measure 6,800 yards. I was there with him that day, along with his younger brother, Kevin. I saw the excitement in his eyes. He was happy, alive, and full of energy on that beautiful sunny day. He was confident and proud that he had reached another goal in his life. To give a summary of what Brian had learned in life thus far would be impossible, but I can give you a real-life example of the person he was becoming. He once told me about a time when he pulled up next to an older car at a stoplight. An adult sat in the driver's seat, and Brian thought to himself, who am I to be driving a nicer car than this grown up next to me? I don't think I have ever been prouder of him than at that moment, because I realized he got it. He appreciated how fortunate he was. He understood that there were more important things in life than what he wanted or what he already had. I think this is part of Brian's legacy, to take what you have, appreciate it, try to master it, and then pass it on to others. Then there was his education. Academics were always foremost among Brian's priorities, the crux of his disciplined life, and a solidifying theme which defined his character and drive for success. From an early age, Brian was an overachiever scholastically. He was a straight A student throughout grade school, junior high, and high school. He maintained a 4.5 GPA in high school and scored a 32 on his ACT. He wanted to go to college with the intent of eventually becoming an orthodontist. He was accepted to Ohio State University, the University of Miami, Michigan State, and the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill at the time of his death. He had not yet heard from UCLA, the University of Michigan, or the University of Florida. I have no doubt that he would have achieved his goal of being an orthodontist if he had continued to pursue that particular goal, because I can say one thing about Brian. It's that when he set his mind to do something, he did not give up until he had achieved it. When he wanted to learn how to juggle, he researched the concept on the internet, and within a weekend's time, he was an accomplished juggler. He was eventually able to juggle 4 balls without difficulty. When he wanted to solve the Rubik's Cube, he got on the internet, watched a video, and mastered it in an afternoon. There was a time in 8th grade when he wanted to get all 100% grades for a quarter. He challenged himself and did it. The boy was smart and self-motivated, both traits that served him well in life. You see, most anyone can achieve goals with motivation and hard work, but it is discipline you have to develop and commit to. Brian quickly learned that he could achieve most things by living his life with this philosophy in mind. I write of Brian's interests, achievements, and drive for success with the hope that many of you will read this and encourage your children to strive for great things. Tell them about Brian and what he accomplished. Tell them he was a kid just like them, with hopes, dreams, and desires of going to college, having a family of his own, and living a long, happy life. Tell them about his beautiful life and how it can be all lost in an instant. Make them understand that every day of your life counts for so much more than you think, because tomorrow may never come. Today is the first day of the rest of your life. So set a goal and work toward that goal every day, even if just for a little bit, until you achieve it. Take what talents you may have to offer the world. Learn to appreciate and build confidence in those talents. Become a master of your talents, and then pass your legacy on to others. This is what life is all about, taking your particular talents and using them for the betterment of others. I think Brian was starting to understand that concept. As I reflect back on what I've written so far, it makes me realize what a beautiful life Brian had, and what a wonderful life we had with Brian in it. With him gone, our lives will never be the same. There will always be an emptiness where there used to be joy and happiness. Please keep this in mind as you read on, and never lose sight of how much you are loved by the people who surround you.